Welcome to Carpets and Coffee, the close to the 2021 season. We have a special guest with us today, the carpet python guru man himself, the one and only Mr. Nick Mutton, is going to be joining us and chatting about all things carpet pythons, right? I don't know. Nick, are you a fan of coffee?
It's the only thing that makes my life worth living.
There you go.
I don't think I ever drank a cup of coffee in my life till I had kids. And since I was the stay-at-home parent, changing diapers and waking up all night, it became the only thing that kept me going. And now I can't live without it. Like I'm so addicted to coffee that I'll get a headache if I haven't had any coffee. Like in the morning, I have to drink caffeine.
Yes.
But I'm also
right there with you.
I can't have too much later in the day. So it's too late to have more coffee now because I've already exceeded my coffee quota.
Yeah, that's the sucky thing, right? We can't have too much.
I'll go through like 2 or 3 pots of coffee in the next 48 hours, easy. My typical weekend, I try to get writing done in the morning when everyone else in my house is asleep. I'll get up before them, and I'll just make a big ass pot of coffee, sit here in my slippers and my bathrobe, and write in the quiet house. But I'm downing a lot of coffee. I can't do it without the coffee. It's an integral part of the creative process, I think.
I don't know about you, but I get a headache if I don't drink enough, and then I also get a headache if I drink too much. Like, it has to be right in the sweet spot.
There is a
Goldilocks
sweet spot.
coffee drinker.
And the sweet spot for me is not a whole pot of coffee, then pre-workout, then 2 energy drinks back to back. That is not the sweet spot.
Good Lord.
Yeah,
holy hell, man!
Not to do that. Like it's you end up with that.
No wonder you're in beast mode.
Well, you end up like you feel like you're gonna puke and stuff, and you're jittery, and you feel like you're gonna throw up, and you're
like, this is awesome.
Going all over your skin. It's like not pleasurable. Like it's.
Oh man.
I want to coffee, 1 energy drink, and some pre-workout. I'll just space out.
I did get this interesting coffee that I saw, and it's called Cooper's Cask Coffee, and it's basically aged in whiskey barrels.
Nice.
I don't know what that's going to do to the taste, but we got malt whiskey barrel coffee, rye whiskey barrel coffee, and rum barrel coffee. So I don't know.
Yeah, report back on those. I'm intrigued.
They just came.
I bet those will be very, very flavor forward and sweet on the back end.
I had no idea you were so sophisticated, Eric.
Oh yeah, I'm high end when it comes to coffee.
That's uptown.
Carpets and coffee, I'm high end. Everything else, I'm just boring. But basically, I read this here. It's aged in whiskey barrels in small batches. These coffee beans are from Indonesia. The style of bean has a specific taste and notes of woody earth and mild sweet tobacco with a ripe tropical fruit. When aged in whiskey barrels, the flavor and aroma of the beans is enhanced with the sweetness of vanilla and caramel from the whiskey. Upon tasting, you get an enriched coffee experience with a very long whiskey finish. I bet you it's good with cigar.
A very long finish. Very long.
Speaking of cigars, I was just over at Total Wine and More today looking in their cigar room. I picked out one for my dad for Christmas, but I had to call Justin. I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And he was too busy. He didn't answer, but I did draw on previous conversations I've overheard about him talking about cigars and picked something out that after he got back to me, he said he did good. So,
okay.
Nice fancy Padron.
Nice.
Yeah, the fucking thing was like $20.
Holy shit.
All right, cool, man. Like, kudos. Here you go. If I smoke that, I'll keel over and die. Cough out a lung.
Isn't that the goal?
This is day 2 of feeling good, so I'm not smoking anything.
There you go.
My lungs are working today. So
nice.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, finally, right? I guess the what do you call it last night? The holiday show.
And
3 hours long.
Grew 3 sizes that night.
I did give your closing finish though, Lucas.
Me?
Yeah, I gave your closing finish.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad for that. I was bummed to miss it, but it was a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time. You had a lot of cool people in there.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick, Talk to us about carpets. Come on. You want to tell us about the book? What do you got for us?
What do I got for you?
When are we going to see this? Is it the more complete carpet? Is that what you
I
guys
didn't
are
want
calling
it to be, but I think it will be. I think there's kind of like that precedent was established, and I think I'm gonna get outvoted on that one, so I'm prepared to accept that.
Good answer.
It's only been like this is only the third book that's in that series that's will have a second edition, and the first two went with that, so I'm pretty sure they're gonna like we've already mocked up the cover with that on there. Like I'm pretty sure they're gonna want to. If it was up to me alone, I probably wouldn't put the more on there, but it's not always up to me. So
Okay.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how painful has the process been to what you expected it to be when you went into it?
It's substantially more painful. Well, there's a phenomenon in the military called mission creep where they, you know what I'm talking about? We got a bad case of mission creep with this one. It's like you start out you have your objectives and what you want to produce and everything, and then you start going down various rabbit holes and just keeps expanding. And then you start to uncover things that probably should be addressed, but no one's ever addressed them because it's really, really difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ultimately, we basically rewrote a lot of this book 3 times.
Wow.
And the last version of it is just finally like, screw it, we're just going to go all the way and go down every rabbit hole and be as thorough as possible and make the changes that need to be made. And, because initially it's like, we're not taxonomists. We don't want to get into that sort of, cesspool. But
right.
It's just which is taxonomy is just, don't even get me started on that. It's just a complete. I think the general sort of non-academic herpers have this idea that like taxonomy is some rigidly regimented science where there's like rules and it's totally not. It's just completely made up and largely nonsense.
Right.
It is entirely left to the discretion of anyone writing the paper what the standard for species, subspecies, or whatever is. Genus. There are no rigid definitions, and there are thus no universally accepted requirements at all. So you see vastly different pythons that are classified as the same species. And then on the other side of it, you've got frogs that are classified as separate full species based entirely on the calls that they make.
Right.
Frog in this valley here makes a slightly different noise, and the same frog in a different valley, there are different species. There are birds that are classified entirely on the color of certain patches of feathers or the songs that they sing, which is basically nothing. But also you find that for whatever species group you're looking into, there's usually like a small little group of academics that are the guys who write all the papers on that thing. And so their personal ideology, which has no basis in any sort of rules at all, carries the day.
Right.
And it just happens that in the Indo-Australian python world, there are a bunch of extreme lumpers that think everything's the same.
Right.
They're not as bad as the monitor guys who write those papers that think literally everything is. That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard, that all varanids are somehow in Varanus. That's nuts.
Right.
That is nuts. It's like, you're telling me a little brevicata is the same genus as a venomous Komodo dragon? Like, it's like literally 100 times the size and literally venomous, same genus. It's insane.
Right.
Yeah. But that's the prerogative of the people writing those papers.
Well, it's probably the wing of science that has the most.
There's
opinion.
You have
Built into
2/3 of
it.
these guys don't believe that subspecies should even exist. So that leads you down various absurdities as well. It's just it's almost a philosophical sort of thing and not as rigid as people think. Like I got tired of explaining to people when that paper on Antaresia came out that said children's pythons and Simpson's pythons are the same species. It's nonsense. That paper is so full of like, I don't buy it at all. I buy that the Cape York spotteds are a different subspecies than the spotteds to the south of the Black Mountain Corridor, because that follows the same biogeographical pattern you see in literally everything, in carpets, in scrub python, in everything that shares distribution above and below that point. It's a natural breakpoint, and you see genetic distinction above and below. So that doesn't surprise me at all. Making the New Guinea spotted python a separate full species is insane. That follows. That is like wholly without precedent in every single instance of every single thing that's ever been looked at. There's population below the Black Mountain Corridor, above on the Cape York Peninsula, and also in New Guinea that share all those three places. The Cape York ones and the New Guinea ones are exactly the same, and below the Black Mountain Corridor is different. Always. Doesn't matter what you're looking at. So the spotted pythons, I think that was like, it was the opportunity to name a new python, but I don't think that's going to hold up at all. I think that it's the same as, and plus I've got pictures of spotted pythons from the tip of the Cape York Peninsula and Lockerbie that are clearly identical to the ones in New Guinea. They're the same thing. And the fact that
they didn't even put the pygmy banded in there, right?
That was one population 7,000 years ago. That is not enough time for speciation at all.
But they didn't even include the pygmy banded bite.
No, and you got to question a paper that like revises the whole Antaresia complex, but doesn't answer the biggest question in all of Antaresia land. Doesn't even address that. What? Like, there's a lot of like, there's normal Stimson's pythons all the way up, way far up the Cape that aren't pygmy bandeds and are not spotted pythons. Like, I've seen pictures of a few specimens from Iron Range. They not in the rainforest, but in the eucalypt savanna, the drier woodland that surrounds the rainforest in Iron Range. Like pretty prototypical Stimson's pythons of normal size, and they're up there, way that far up there. So there's stuff that needs to be sorted out that's not well understood yet. But I don't have a lot of faith in that paper for that reason. And also, there have been 4 papers previously that looked at a genomic level for Antaresia, never with big sampling or anything. Usually it's as part of like they're looking at an overview of all pythons, and they'll have Antaresia in there, and every single one of them shows children's pythons and Stimson's pythons as distinct species. They always show the same thing, that they're relatively recently derived and sister lineages. They're not that different, that the split is recent, like mid-Pleistocene divergence, which is relatively recent, but it all upholds that they're different things. And then now, exactly the same thing, but these other things that clearly aren't a different thing are a different thing. And I don't, there's some problems with the methodology in my estimation, and I'm fortunate in that I have a few friends that are geneticists, which is weird that for one person to have multiple friends who are geneticists, but like 3.
Good fortune.
I got one of my friends. He's actually American, doing postdoctoral stuff in Australia. I won't mention his name and drag him into me talking trash, but he pointed out some flaws with the methodology of the samples and whatnot from that paper that kind of make me question my faith in it. So, and plus, what's that paper say? Does it say they're the same species? No, it says in that guy's opinion they're the same species. This idea that there is an official taxonomy is the problem. And the public, look at how many Australians you saw. Well, they're all children's pythons now, as if there was some official decree that they're all children's. Like, no. Papers come out, and anybody who reads that paper can choose to be persuaded and accept those findings or totally not.
Right.
There is no such thing as an official taxonomy at all. There never has been, and there never will be. You do oftentimes eventually get to like a consensus opinion where people stop questioning things, but there's no official anything. Well, we lost Lucas.
Nah, he just turned into Owen.
No, you didn't.
We just gained an Owen squatch. That's all.
I'm so out of the loop. I'm like, what in the hell am I looking at right now? That's pretty good, though. That's
pretty good, right?
Pretty good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It stopped Owen dead in his tracks yesterday, too.
Yeah, it gets him. Sorry, didn't mean to derail the show.
Silly me. I selected an avatar that was just my actual face. I didn't know we were. Would have picked something more comical. So there's no official taxonomy. When this book comes out and the taxonomy is different, it is also not official. Even my own is not. It is, this is Justin and I's interpretation of all the available lines of evidence and data, and this is the conclusion we came to that makes the most sense. Anybody reading that is free to disagree with it and come up with their own thing, and that's how it's always been. It's how it always will be. But people need to get out of their head that there's an official, official taxonomy, because there is no such thing. I believe subspecies exist. I think subspecies as a taxonomic designation are important because you have like wide-ranging species, and there's population structuring within that. They're not all the same from place to place. They're not necessarily interbreeding anymore. So if you don't accept that subspecies exist, you end up with like crazy, things. You'd have to accept that a diamond python and a Papuan carpet python are somehow indistinguishable, and that's just patently absurd. It's absurd. But they're not so different as to genetically be a full species. But you need to be able. It allows you to denote the population structure. Right. I do think you could make a coherent argument that Spilota should not be, that the rest of the carpets should be at full species status from Spilota, not in relation to each other, but that you would have like a Spilota as its own thing, and then a Variegata complex where all these subspecies would be subspecies of Variegata, not a Spilota. Diamond pythons are not, they're not as close to the other things as you've been led to believe. They are pretty divergent. The others,
which I guess would make sense, right? Because they're so different than.
If you take Spilota, Imbricata, and Bredli out of the mix, all the remaining carpet pythons are more closely related to each other than any of them are to those three.
Gotcha.
So, like a coastal is more, a northern coastal is more closely, and I said northern, that's significant. Might be able to come up later, I don't know. Is more closely related to like a Variegata than it is to a diamond python. Yeah.
Chuck had a question. I don't know if you what do you what do you think about so they had a reptile fight club where Justin and Scott Eiper were talking about taxonomy of carpet pythons, and one of the things that the Eipers believe is that they sort of refer to them as races, sort of what you're saying, the Variegata stuff, sort of as races. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My own personal thoughts is that I disagree with that. Not strongly, but it's largely a semantic argument. You could also use the term ecotype, which is another way. We don't want to use races in this book because it's largely for an American audience. And though there's in a biological context, there's nothing wrong with that word. But as we all know, people will read things and take the complete wrong meaning. It's a perfectly good word and perfectly descriptive in biological sorts of contexts. But I think the use of race implies that it's literally just a difference in the paint job, that it is only skin deep, and it is not that. There are underlying genetic population structuring. They are not all the same at the genetic level. You see that in their DNA when you look at it, and if you've got phenotypic differences, which are kind of the weakest indicator, really, and you've got you've got biogeographical things to look at, you've got genetic things to look at, and you've got kind of phenotypic things to look at. And if all three things are telling you these are different snakes, it's because they're different snakes. If I showed you a Variegata from any of the three populations, you'd be able to tell me that that's what it was. Would you get a Darwin carpet confused for any other carpet other than a Papuan carpet,
right,
or a northernish Cape York carpet? You might get those three confused because genetically there's almost no difference between any of them, but you wouldn't confuse that group with anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it's carpet pythons, and they're so phenotypically plastic that you'll get anomalies and weird animals that look out of place and places that pop out once in a while. But as a general trend, it's pretty easy to spot that, isn't it? A Variegata.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
I could tell you 99 times out of 100, I can tell you the difference between a Darwin and a New Guinea carpet, but those northern Cape York ones, you can't tell apart from Papuan carpets. They are Papuan carpets. There is almost no discernible genetic distinction between them or phenotypic distinction. It's the same snake.
Right.
So that's one of the things. I meant to talk to Justin to make sure he was okay with me talking about this.
He's in the chat. Ask him now.
In the chat.
Yeah.
Thumbs up, Justin.
You'll all read about it soon enough, I suppose. But
so you doubled the size of the book, right? I mean, pretty much, right?
I don't know the actual page count yet. I think I'm getting fearful that it might not hit 600 pages, and I kind of was in love with the idea of 600 pages because it's just an insanely large thing. I think Riley had to go to the bathroom.
Either that or his Crebos are fighting, one or the other.
I'm telling you. But
hopefully the former, not the latter.
we've got a few of the chapters are back from our editor and everything laid out in PDF form with the photos in, and so you kind of get an idea of a page count. And my estimate of the morph chapter is it's going to come in a little bit lighter than I thought it was, in that it is likely to only be 130 pages or so. I thought it'd be like 150, 160. It's only going to be 130-ish.
Good
probably.
God.
Yeah, no, it's its own book. Like, it's nuts. I've been collecting photographs for that for 5 years.
I did get a good laugh out of somebody's responses on.
Now I got Australians hatching stuff right now, trying to. Is it too late to put it in?
Yeah, on one of your posts on Facebook, like asking for pictures, one of the comments made me chuckle. He was like, there's Google. It's like, well, that's not how that works.
No, it isn't. Like, you can't just pilfer pictures off the internet. Like,
no.
You have any cool pictures I stumbled onto that I've never been able to track down the person who took the actual picture?
Right.
You got to get permission from the person.
Exactly.
Not who posted it. That doesn't matter. People sometimes don't get. It's like the person who clicked that button on that camera is the person I need to get permission from to use the image. That's how you're supposed to do it. And it's
if you want free use photos, you have to go into the advanced search settings and change the filters so you can get the fair use free.
And then there's like 5, and they all suck, and everyone uses them.
Yep, exactly.
We've got a few of those in there for little things and stuff. What was the path of least resistance? But if you want to, it's never the thing you want, like a wild Bredl's python eating a bird or something. Like, you don't get that. Like, we've got that in the book, but it wasn't. You have to track down the people who took those images and get that stuff. So,
I got a question. Will and feel free to say, like, you can't answer it in specifics, but will the will there be any diving into the question of what Nova Guinea carpets are in this publication?
No, but I'll tell you. Well,
okay.
I'll take it.
I sent a ton of samples to Warren Booth to run. I've got a few other concurrent projects, a couple papers and at various, stages or non-stages of completion with Warren. I've known Warren forever. He's a great guy. So I talked Warren into running some carpet samples for the book and writing up a short phylogenetics chapter with our own testing just for the book, because I thought,
of course,
that's a level of detail no one has ever in the history of reptile books has ever gone that far. So that's why I wanted to do it, because no one's ever done that, gone that deep.
Right.
In that body of samples I sent him, everything keyed out pretty much like I was anticipating it based on previous data and everything. I did send him samples of those because of my own curiosity. They're not going to be included because if you don't know the exact or have any really good idea where they're from geographically, it's not informative. And they keyed out to be, extremely variegata. Like, they were basically indistinguishable from regular Papuan carpets at a genetic level. There was almost no daylight whatsoever between them and a normal, because I sent him wild Papuan carpets. And there was basically keyed out to be the same snake. They're not the same snake, but they are. I've been keeping that under my hat for months.
So
I have a few very petty reasons for doing that, but I guess the cat's out of the bag now.
Well, to the people who care, the cat's out of the bag. To the rest of the world, if they miss this,
it's like there were a few people I was kind of like, I don't really want them to know about that.
So you've got some IJ Papuan carpet lovers here, and so I think I speak for several of us when we all say we agree with you that they are totally different. Like, they seem different. Like, I got a pair.
That's the thing.
Which is crazy. I got a pair from Travis. I've seen the individuals he's got from you. Yeah, I've seen all of them. He showed me all of them. He explained the different generations and everything, and I took a close look at them. And
I have a little bit more information on where they were probably from, but I don't want to say it on the air just because I've noticed over years if I sort of like say something out of hand like that isn't well supported, that people will take that and run with it, and then it becomes the gospel because Nick said it.
Of course.
That's not what it is.
Of course.
Yeah. I can't remember the guy's name. There's a European guy who was just obsessed with figuring out this mystery. And I communicated with him for a period of years, and he did eventually dig up a location. But it was you know, when you get like one person telling you one thing and then and it's not back, you know, you can't corroborate it with a secondary source, and it's kind of like, maybe
It's just hearsay.
It is kind of. It wasn't really enough. That I wasn't really going to be totally going to go to bat for it.
Fair.
Usually, with that tracking that stuff down, I want to get like a couple of different people telling me the same thing who don't know that they're telling me that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, independent as best you can, the ability you can. I was never able to get a second source. The location is in PNG, but it's not so far. Like you have a contiguous patch of carpet pythons because you have that patch of eucalypt savanna in southern New Guinea. About 2/3 of that patch is on the Indonesian side, but about 1/3 of it is it's basically between the Indonesian border and the Transfly Delta.
It literally that line goes right down the middle.
It's in that third, but it's like the middle of that third, but it's not like all that far, and you would expect to have gene flow across that distance, so it doesn't really explain why they're so phenotypically different. Explain why they're so genetically similar, but not why they're so phenotypically different. Unless there's just, but if you've ever bred morphs of any snake, it's like we know as people who breed these things that we actually know things that the academics don't realize is like that sometimes you can have a single allele, one copy of one allele that completely and utterly changes the phenotype of the animal in the extreme. I mean, look at the cinnamon morph in ball pythons. One gene, if you get 2 copies of it, it makes you a completely black patternless snake and changes the shape of your skull. Changes the shape of your snout. One gene does all that.
Powerful.
It doesn't. If you were to examine genomically a super cinnamon ball and a regular ball, it would be exactly the same. You would not show up as any different at all. So it can be just that they are Papuan carpets in a particular place that maybe isn't interbreeding anymore with the rest of them, and just a couple of genes have changed and it's altered the phenotype. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's, you know, a deeply diverged lineage to be. You have 2 concepts, I guess. You've got genotype and phenotype. What are things at a genetic level and what do they look like? And those are not as closely linked as people think. Very often things that look very different from each other are also genetically very different from each other, but not always. Right. Sometimes you have things that are, I mean, if you look at 2 examples of modern primates, chimpanzees and humans. Humans, we all look vastly different depending on where in the world we're from, but we're genetically, there isn't 2 shits difference between any of us. Especially outside of Africa, everybody's almost genetically identical outside of Africa, and not that much different if you're in Africa. Whereas chimpanzees, to our eyes, all look the same mostly, and they're vastly more genetically diverse. They have way more genetic diversity, but less phenotypic diversity, and we have evolved in phenotype very rapidly, and it has outpaced any sort of genetic structuring. So those 2 concepts are a bit divorced from each other.
Yeah. Right.
Something different with that group, though, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, there is. I don't know. It could just be that there's a freaking river that's not letting snakes communicate and breed anymore, or whatever. And it's probably something that is, you know, terminal Pleistocene, Holocene transition related, because that's when the entire map of the world changed about 12,000 years ago. Rivers got drowned, you know, all kinds of lakes disappeared, dried up, like everything changed. And so the old patterns of gene flow between Cape York and both sides of New Guinea are completely off the table. Everything's different. And it's probably a situation where they were able to interbreed up until relatively recently. And then after that early Holocene, Pleistocene transition, something has occurred that is now, you know, preventing or making that more difficult, which is keeping their genes in their population. It's like the earliest stages of speciation. If it were allowed to continue for fast forward 50,000 years, you might have something truly different. But it's just very early in that process.
Interesting.
That's just a hypothesis.
Right. And then, you know, it goes back to kind of what you've already touched on a little bit, and you and I have talked about a lot, which, you know, it just depends on what you personally, as a human with opinions, consider a species. But that doesn't mean that it's not something. Even if it's not a different species, it can still be something that is different. And that's still valuable.
Well, what's irritating with me about taxonomy is the lack of any sort of standard whatsoever. We apply vastly different standards to just different things, on a whim.
Right.
If we applied the same standard of genetic divergence required for speciation in the guys writing the papers on Australian pythons, if we applied their standard to hominids, all the great apes would be Homo sapiens. Chimps, bonobos, we'd all be the same species. Last I checked, we're not even the same genus because we apply a vastly different standard to us.
Yeah, for sure.
There's as much genetic distinction between two different groups of chimpanzees as there is between a Neanderthal and a anatomically modern human. But they're a separate species because we don't apply these things equally.
Right.
And we actually apply it in a more nonsensical way in that there's a correlation between how fast something evolves and its reproductive output over time. Chance mutations that are the building blocks of evolution, those happen only when you reproduce. There's every time another generation comes into existence, every time another zygote is formed, basically, there's an opportunity for a random mutation. So organisms that reproduce a lot of babies, like fruit flies, where you have like multiple generations a year and there's thousands that just reproduce exponentially, can evolve very quickly because the odds of a beneficial mutation popping up are a lot greater if you have, 5,000 descendants in a year, whereas if you only have one, you're going to go slower.
Yeah.
If you look at that, things like larger pythons in particular don't really reproduce. You're slower to mature. You're an apex predator in those ecosystems. You're not putting out anywhere near that many offspring. So the tendency would be to evolve at a slower pace. And I can point out obvious examples of that. Like if you look at a Dumeral's boa and look at a boa constrictor, they're both obviously boas. You can see pattern commonality in a Dumeral's boa with a red-tailed boa, and you're talking about lineages that would have split on the order of 40 million years ago. And in 40 million years, they still got common pattern elements. Look at most Australian pythons will have a double neck stripe and a little bit. Look at the Antaresia head pattern and that double neck stripe on a Cape York spotted python. Then go look at a carpet python. Then look at a juvenile green tree python. You'll see that same pattern, the same pattern elements in all those species, which we know diverged 15 to 20 million years ago, but they still retain that. That's how slow that process is in them. Mm-hmm. So if anything, a smaller genetic divergence is more significant in a reptile that evolves slower. It's more significant. It's significant of a longer, a longer period of time. It's more significant, and they tend to weight it less, unless it's a leaf litter skink, in which case every damn skinky and every little, they have no problem. But for some reason, the pythons have to all be the same. So I don't. So that's the longest answer ever about my good friend Scott Eiper's. I like Scott a lot. Scott's a great guy, and he's a great photographer. He's been very helpful writing books to be friends with Scott. He takes great pictures, and he's very generous in that regard.
Awesome. That's true. Yes.
There is a weird thing though with Australians that they just all want to think carpet pythons are all the same thing. Everything else is different. But like if you ask, I've had this conversation with Scott, like the last time when he was right after he was on with you guys talking about basically all carpets are the same, he sent me a paper. He sent me 2 papers in the last like 3 months, and they're like on new frog species that are exactly the same. They're exactly the same as diamond pythons and southern coastal carpet pythons, where you see like there's one, they split it up into 3 species, where it's like the northern one, which equates to your southern coastals. You got a southern one that equates to your diamond python. Then you've got a transition zone that's the intergrade form between them. And a lot of times they'll name that as a separate species. It's like it's the same exact biogeographical pattern.
Right.
And no one questions it if it's frogs, but it's pythons, you're crazy. It's like it's the same thing. It's the same pattern in everything.
That's why it really pays to be a little bit more, open and look at other taxa as well in the same corridors. Like you're saying, it's going to follow certain trends.
I think I do a lot of that. You can learn a tremendous amount by looking at other scientific disciplines like geology and botany and all these sorts of things, paleoclimatology. And you can learn a lot kind of by working around a problem because almost completely the same evolutionary drivers that are pushing speciation and are pushing things to adapt are shared by all the things that live in that habitat. Like, right. So if a biogeographic barrier comes into existence that stops animals moving, it's stopping all the animals from moving. If the temperature, it's like it affects all those things. So the biogeographical distribution patterns and speciation patterns you see of one thing generally are reflected in almost everything that shares that habitat. If you look at the biogeography of cassowaries, it's the same as chondros, it's the same as crocodile skinks, it's the same as scrub pythons. It's the same because they're in the same forests and the same pressures are on all of them. So it's not surprising that, there's a lot of species that show a genetic distinction above and below the Black Mountain corridor. Not just carpets, it's a bunch of things. That same variegata thing where you've got them in Northern Territory, Cape York, and New Guinea. That, what else shares that exact same thing? Frilled dragons, exactly. Where the Cape York, and in every case we have that three-way distribution, you'll see the genetic evidence will say exactly the same thing. That Cape York and New Guinea are indistinguishable from each other, and that Northern Territory is close, but is a little different. And you'll see that in water pythons. You can't tell them apart. The Cape York and the New Guinea ones are genetically the same. Northern Territory is a little different. Frilled dragons, same thing. Carpet pythons, same thing. And the reason for that is all that was dry land. The entire Sahel shelf was exposed up to just 12,000 years ago. When the sea level starts to rise, as glacial ages end and the sea level starts to come up, it starts to flood and inundate that entire area. There's a large lake called Lake Carpentaria, right where the Gulf of Carpentaria is now. It's a brackish lake. And you would have good habitat on either side of that for carpet pythons and presumably plenty of gene flow. When ocean water starts to flood that low-lying area, it starts in the west and moves eastward over a few thousand years. So what happens is once the marine inundation gets to the Lake Carpentaria and Lake Carpentaria becomes the Gulf of Carpentaria, at that point, that severs the gene flow from Northern Territory to New Guinea and the Cape York. That becomes separate at that point. That happens some thousands of years before the final severing of New Guinea and Australia and Cape York. They stay connected for 3,000-4,000 years longer before that's connection. So that's why those two populations are always closer together, and the close cousin is the one in Northern Territory.
That is so freaking cool.
I love that. Yeah.
You see that?
It's pretty badass.
That's what the evidence is. The evidence for that is overwhelming. Like that's not like people can argue with my opinions on taxonomy, and that's a completely legitimate. I mean, I love Scott, but he doesn't have to agree with me. Like his opinion is his opinion, mine is mine. It's like, and there's no right answer. It is entirely. Right. But you can't. Some of these things are sort of beyond debate at this point. Like that happened, and that's the effect, and that shows this. You see the signature of that is no one's really arguing that. The central argument of taxonomy is always, how different is different enough to be a different species? Where do you draw the line? It's not that these are exactly the same. It's that where do you draw the line? That is an entirely a judgment call.
Right.
Right.
I think that in general, you do more harm by assuming things are all the same than you do by assuming they're different. There's a lot of look at the Chinese giant salamanders. They're very much an endangered species.
Yes.
And they started farming them. Awesome. They made bazillions of giant Chinese salamanders. Great. But. Except they didn't realize the time they all lumped them all together as the one species. And then it turns out, it's actually multiple species. And now all of these tens of bazillions you've been made a bunch of freaking hybrids.
Are all worthless to the wild population.
I mean, as far as
they're worthless to the wild population. Had they taken the splitters approach and they all turned out to be the same, no harm, no foul. Had you, but one leads you down the road to potential problems. One is just might be making more work for yourself, but it's not going to hurt anything.
I've often had the exact same thought. I mean, as far as taxonomy pertains to conservation work specifically, I've yet to hear an instance where lumping was beneficial, whereas splitting at least gives you a better chance. Even if it's not a separate species, isn't a separate population still worth preserving?
Safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
There's several pages devoted to this in the book where you're trying to drive home these concepts of taxonomy. And one part mentioned that most people don't realize there's over 30 different species definitions. Over 30 completely different definitions of what constitutes a species. None of them agree with each other.
Yeah.
And there's always kind of the flavor of the month, which has lately been the phylogenetic species concept. But, is it right? There's 29 others.
Right.
Which one's right? They're all right or they're all wrong. It doesn't, there's just whichever one
there
you want to use.
There is no right, right? At the end of the day, it's just a bunch of monkeys looking at a snapshot of dynamic processes and trying to put it all up.
I personally tend to, and Justin does as well, I tend to be more of a devotee of what is called the evolutionary species concept. And that basically takes into account, because if you have you have old species and you've got young species that have just now taken their first steps towards being, on the road to being a species, and then you've got others that are very, deeply diverged lineages that are old species.
Right.
We are, 7 million years removed from our last common ancestor with chimpanzees. We are an old species. Our lineage is old in that context in relation to them. The evolutionary species concept takes into account, like, okay, are you interbreeding now at all, and are you likely to in the future? So things are species that are on their own separate evolutionary trajectory. They might not have gotten very far along in that trajectory, but they are on their own path, and they are never to return to their parent population.
Right.
And I like that because it denotes things like, there are a lot of insular populations in Indonesia and islands around New Guinea that are, how different are these? They're clearly they're not ever going to interbreed again. They are on their own trajectory. Have they been on there very long? How different, to assume that that's exactly the same thing, I think I don't agree with that. I think better to err on the side of caution in that regard. I like subspecies. And if you believe in subspecies, then there's a bunch of carpet python ones, because there's, there are well-known biogeographical barriers to animal movements that stop or limit gene flow. And the biggest challenge that caused all the rewrites of the book was you have like an existing sort of subspecies structure and architecture that is based entirely on color and pattern and nothing else, on what they look like. And then you've got a bunch of academics that think they're all the same thing. Part of that is they don't want to wade into a very, very difficult, convoluted thing. And now, having waded into it for the last 4 years, I understand why. It's a difficult thing with a lot of moving parts to try to make sense of. It's way easier to say, oh, they're all the same. But that's kind of a cop out, because they're not the same. You've got well-defined clades within the Spelota complex, if you will. So trying to sort that all out and come up with a taxonomic arrangement that actually agreed with the biogeographical information and the genetic information, that was the challenge, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
So endless hours of studying the various fairly well-documented biogeographic barriers of Australia. And wouldn't you know it, they line up exactly with the genetic breakpoints between all these things. Like, go figure, right? Like one of the easiest ones that's not the Black Mountain Corridor is the Carpentaria Gap. The southernmost edge of the Gulf of Carpentaria is an arid area, and it stops everything. Nothing really crosses that. So what you find on both sides is two reciprocally non-phyletic lineages. You've always got, they're different. You can see that in their DNA on both sides. Might be the same species still, because it's a relatively recent development, but they are separate.
Right.
And you just see that over and over and over again. So that one, there's a bunch of those. Another thing we did this time, Justin really got kind of pretty obsessed with it, actually, is there are a lot of river systems. River systems are basically the highways by which animals move. Animals will disperse the easiest way possible. Frankly, the easiest way you can possibly disperse is to get flushed down a river and wash up somewhere. But even not even so much that, as rivers provide a habitat corridor, because there's a water table and there's prey and there's trees and it's the easiest way to
good productivity, riparian vegetation. Yeah.
Yes, in Australia you've got a lot of very arid country that has dry riverbeds, but there's still a water table that's closer to the surface in those areas. So you'll still see it looks really dry, but there'll be like trees on like a dry river course. Mm-hmm. And even that, like if you look at the distribution for inland carpets, it's almost entirely along this spider's web of dry rivers that only have water flowing in them very, very occasionally. But that is the what's going on? I see
Riley's looking. Is that the blacktail?
Yeah, I got my Crebos together right now, and they're making noise.
Oh man,
they are not adept climbers.
No.
Sorry.
But anyway,
so mapping like river systems, both that exist now and using bathymetric data to figure out where rivers used to be that flowed into the Gulf of the Lake Carpentaria Basin and all this stuff. because there are river systems that connected New Guinea and Australia that aren't there anymore because they're underwater. Figuring out dispersal mechanisms, and so it's not just where they are, but there's a bit of discussion as to how they got there in the first place in these various places. My only fear with the new book is that it'll confuse people because it's tough stuff. Like, it's hardcore. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, it is. Like, if you want to be a hobbyist and you want to keep pretty snakes in a plastic box and you know how to get them to breed and get the babies feeding, all that's going to be easy to access. But some of these things are pretty heavy stuff. Like, it's not light reading. The evolutionary history chapter now is likely to be well over 30 pages of just text without images and graphs and all this kind of stuff. Just the text file is likely to be over 30 pages. The goal is I got to finish that tomorrow. Got about a half a page left to write is all. Because we decided to add on to the discussion of intergrade zones on the count of discovering a few different ones. So you got to go into all that. So turns out,
awesome.
You have
very cool.
You've got the Murray-Darling Basin is not quite as sealed off as people probably previously thought, and that you've got areas of contact where coastal carpets are interbreeding with inland carpets, and inland carpets are interbreeding with diamond pythons in very limited areas. So getting that sorted out. What is he doing?
Riley's going to work. I mean, I think we have to.
I think he's separating them out. Yeah.
So for context, if people don't know, last year Riley's female almost got eaten during breeding attempts, so he's a little gun shy.
Yeah.
What kind of Crebos are they?
Those are the blacktails.
Blacktails, yeah.
I got a pair of yellowtails. I don't really enjoy them. They're super flighty, spastic. Every time you open the tub, they go shooting out. Like, can't feed them anything big. Got to feed them these like 3 fuzzies. Like, it's just the weirdest. So the opposite of a python, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was telling you, Nick, last time we were chatting, I finally have dipped my feet with Trimarchon with Eastern Indigos, and they're definitely not like a python, that's for sure. It's almost more like a monitor without legs.
Like a monitor.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's like, these things are high maintenance. High maintenance.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, man. Go ahead, Eric.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the biogeography stuff is one of the things I'm most excited to read about in the book, because it's something that hasn't been on my radar at all as like a herpetoculturalist until talking to you, Nick. And now I see it everywhere. I'm always wondering about it now, when I look at anything in a landscape.
You see super glaringly obvious examples of this phenomenon that people in the hobby don't catch on to. Like, if you look at, like, broadly, wherever you find carpet or scrub pythons, arboreal pythons in that part of the world, you will also find a blue-tongued skink at the bottom of those same trees, and a cockatoo in those trees. Almost always. And in every case, there's even overlap. Like, if you looked at, like, what's the smallest scrub python? Oh, a Tanabar python. What cockatoo lives in those same trees? Oh, it's a Goffin's cockatoo. Is it a coincidence that the smallest cockatoo shares the same tree as the smallest scrub python? Probably not. What's the smallest blue-tongued skink? Oh, it's the Tanabar blue-tongued skink. Is that a coincidence? Probably not. And all these things are small. It's because it's those same forces. If you look at, like, there's just a ton of examples of these sort. Look at a Centralian blue-tongued skink, and then look at a Bruttles python. It's like, it's the same paint job. Like, it's living in the same place. It's like you see this sort of evolutionary convergence between vastly different things.
They're all painted by the same drivers, like you're saying.
They are. It's so
it's amazing.
Or over and over and over.
Pilbar rock monitor too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's a good looking lizard.
I did get a question from somebody, Nick, and I know I've talked to you about this before, but I figured since you're here, you could answer this. So, why do Papuan carpets like to stay in their water bowls as opposed to all other carpet pythons?
Because they hate their keepers. It's the bane of my existence. Like, I'm starting to breed fewer Darwin carpets for that same reason. It's like they just habitually swamp their cage, flood the freaking cage, even to the point of soaking so long they fuck their skin up sometimes. It's like, what are you doing? Although I mean, there's no one's ever done any field work to why this happens, but the most logical thing is that both of those places, southern New Guinea and top end, are a seasonal floodplain environment full of billabongs. You have a dry savanna, and then you have a flooded savanna for part of the year, and it's probably to do with that, where you're just like, easiest place in the world to hide is a flooded, some grass is partly underwater, and you just soak it all the time. So it's probably an instinctive, an instinct to hide in water because that is an easy thing to do in those habitats, and they overdo it, and to the point of driving us insane.
Yes.
And some of those Darwins, like the albinos especially, like, I only give them a 2-ounce water bowl anyway. And I've got some of these with like a 1/2 ounce water bowl that's inside of a 2-ounce water bowl. So if they spill the little tiny 1/2 ounce of water, the other one catches it to keep the cage dry. It's like it's really frustrating sometimes. But
Interesting.
so I think their poplin carpets do it. Darwins are actually worse. They do it just as much.
Huh. I need a larger sample size then. Mine don't touch their fucking water. It's crazy.
Well, keep breeding those ones.
I would love to if I could.
Riley struggles with that one. He can't crack the code.
Dude, I don't know what the fuck it is.
It's usually just fresh babies. Once they get 6-8 months old or a year, that tendency tends to go away, and they're not as adept to do it. But little tiny babies, if they can fit their whole body in it, that's what they're doing. So I'm constantly trying to only put a little water in the bowl, so if they put their whole body in it, it doesn't overflow and soak the paper towel and whatnot.
Yep.
Interesting.
I have 3 F1s that I produced a couple of years ago that I have the David Brahms elevated perches with the deli cup suspended, and I put the shallowest deli cup that fits in there, and I fill it like 1/3 of the way, because every time I change it, those bastards get in there, and it's like it's prone to flood if I fill it up anymore. So
I don't know.
Apparently, I sent Laurie a broken snake. She has 8 poplin carpets, and the only one that soaks excessively is the one that she got from me. I'm sorry, Laurie.
Perfect.
it's well hydrated. It's not
Nick, I got a question for you. So, without going into the detail, I know that this has obviously been a lifelong obsession for you, right? So was there anything with the new book that you went into the process thinking in your head was going to be the case, that new information proved you completely wrong? Were you greatly surprised about anything that you found this time? Without diving into the details, if you don't want to.
Not one thing, but I keep up on whatever papers that are relevant as they've come out over the time in between versions of the book. So I was aware of all that data anyway. So I had a pretty good idea how our own stuff would shake out. One thing that it was actually in the data from 2003 and 2014. There were 2 papers that looked at them genomically, and it buried in that data. I somehow didn't really notice it the first time around, but upon subsequent review of those papers for this, you noticed another population of genetically distinct carpet pythons that hitherto I had not really noticed that they were that distinct.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very distinct. What?
Oh, nothing.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not like a state secret. I mean, it's like these are public. A couple of these are papers pretty easy. You can get open access, just get them on the internet. But what you find is that the inland carpets from those sort of Flinders ranges, Gammon ranges, you ever notice those are weird looking and don't look like other inland carpets? It's because they're not. And they're not confined to just that. They actually make a pretty pretty much a straight line through the Gammon, Flinders and Gammons, and then up damn near to Mount Isa. Through that pretty arid habitat, you have a narrow strip of inland carpets, if you will, that are genetically quite distinct from all the others. Like so distinct that you could make a pretty compelling argument that they shouldn't be inland carpets.
Right.
They are their own thing. They all look like that all the way up too. Even these most obscure places you find them way out in the middle of nowhere, they all are phenotypically distinct. And if you look at a phylogenetic tree with a bunch of inland carpet samples, you'll see two different groupings. You'll see two different clades within that. And so they are pretty distinct. I wasn't expecting them to be quite as distinct.
Very, very cool.
Right.
I'll
I
take
knew
it
that the
off
Camas
the
and Guineas
basket
were going to be a bit different, but that extended past those mountain ranges in a more expansive way.
Justin
So
says,
we-
leave something for the people to read.
Who said that?
Julander. So I'll take it easy on that, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, when they
Good
read,
little
when they see
taste.
the range map in the book, it's actually in two different colors. There'll be two different shades. And note that these are, we're leaving them in this pile over here, but it should be known that they're not exactly the same, and that you can't solve all things in one book. That's not how science works. You pretty much you move the ball forward as best you can to the best of your ability, and then other people will pick it up and take it further. And it's never the final word on anything. And this certainly won't be either. But I will say one thing I'll be a little proud of, and I know that people are going to come out of the woodwork to disagree because it's 2021 and it's the internet, and that's what people do. Is they come out of the woodwork to disagree with you about everything. But for the very first time in the entire history of carpet python taxonomy, there will be a phylogenetic arrangement that completely lines up with the genetic underpinnings of that group. The boundaries between putative subspecies line up with biogeographic barriers and genetic clusters.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to it. It's not just color and pattern, but it's backed up by the evidence.
Awesome.
That you can argue that this amount of distinction at the genetic level isn't enough for X, Y, or Z. You can make that argument, but you can't argue that the subspecies as we have defined them are based on nothing but color and pattern, because that's unequivocally not true. Again, but since there's no rules, you can argue. It's just a matter of where different people want to draw the line, I suppose.
Right. Well, that's awesome, man. I can't wait. I think I speak for all of us when I say that.
There's a few confusing bits. I did send Eric a sneak preview of a small section kind of that tease up a couple of chapters, because I just wanted like an outside opinion. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
it was awesome.
Well, sometimes, like, Justin and I have been pretty immersed in this for a decade or over a decade now. In 4 years, we've been digging with this. And so sometimes when you've been that immersed in it for that long, you kind of can lose sight on, like, because you end up understanding it so well, you just assume on an unconscious level everybody else does, even though that's clearly not true. So I kind of worry that, like, we're writing something that, while Justin and I can look at it, and it makes perfect sense to us, because we've been reading this for years and working on it forever, that it needs to be accessible for people that haven't been doing that. They need to be able to read that and interpret that, and it needs to make sense. So I sent Eric a little bit just to make sure we weren't completely out over our skis too far.
No, it's very good. Very, very
That's
good.
that podfather privilege, man.
Got to have some perk to this 10-year shindig.
Yeah, right. And it's been known you a long time.
Yeah.
I like what Lori
One of us
said.
had
As
the
long
gray
as
hair.
breadline is still breadline, all is well with the world.
What did it say?
As long as breadline are still breadline, all is well.
Oh, that's unequivocal and unchangeable. That is never going to. They were never a subspecies ever.
No.
Like, they were described by Graham Gow in 1981 as Python breadline, because they were still in Python at the time. They were described, initially named as a full species. They were never ever formally made a subspecies by anybody.
Right.
There's just a few Australian authors that just like, it's just a carpet snake. We're gonna call it a subspecies, based on no evidence whatsoever. Like,
Lori, you can rest easy on that.
They are extremely well. Them and Imbricata are extremely deeply diverged from all the others. There's no question that Imbricata are a full species and that Bredli are full species. You can quibble about how many subspecies or if there's subspecies of Spilota if you want, but you can't. No one's going to question those two. They're way off. Very deeply diverged lineages that even the lumpers can't argue with that. That's why I'll be happy. I'll know my work on Earth is done when people stop saying, Spilota Imbricata, when that goes away completely. Still once in a while crops up, but
yeah. And then we got to get him over here.
Oh,
Not holding my
Oh.
breath on that. Like I
oh,
went
my
to West
heart.
Australia because I wanted to find a wild one, and the only one we found was smashed on the road. I finally got to see my first imbricata at a pet shop in Perth. Like, we had like a half hour to kill before going to the airport. I'm like, I wonder if they had sure enough they had 2 wild caught imbricata at this pet shop, and they let us play with them, so we at least got to see an imbricata, play with an imbricata.
Nice.
Yeah.
Better than
How much
nothing.
did they cost? How much did
What?
they cost? How
Yeah,
much
it
did they
wasn't that
cost? Do you
much.
remember?
I can't quite recall. I don't think it was all that much.
Hmm.
There's a medium-sized one and like a smaller juvenile. There were
It-
wild caught, legally wild caught, but it's like I got to hold and play with an imbricata, so
Yeah.
Very
I went
good.
to the airport. I need to get back to Western Australia. I need to cross that one off the bucket list.
Yeah. You got to
Justin,
get
of course, was
Bradley
there
off
at the
the.
same
You
time,
got to.
so-
You got to get Bradley off the list, man. That's your
They're
snake.
hard. They're not an easy because a lot of these things like Bredli, you can't. It's hard to. You can't really road cruise them as effectively. You got to beat the bush and walk through.
You got to come
canyons.
with us. We
It's a
found
bit-
Owen Pelly, so you know.
Have you ever thought that maybe you used up all of your herpetological luck you're ever going to have in one
Heck
find,
no,
and
man.
it's going to be getting skunked forever?
No,
No?
no.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm knocking on wood right now, but you know, I think it's that little Rob Stone, man. That little magic hobbit. He works magic.
I have been there not once but twice on 2 different trips and haven't found anything. Nothing at all. But
I
you
think
never
it's
know.
just
Sometimes
luck.
you get lucky. I mean, we found a
Just
Pilbara
luck.
olive python. That was pretty
Just
cool.
time and place, man. Right time, right place.
That's it. It's luck.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I wished that Owen Pelly into that tree, man. I just wished it and wished it and wished it, and there it was.
It's one of those like
He
you could
was
go there like
manifesting.
you could go there every night for like 5 years and find nothing, and then some random tourist just walks up on day 1. Oh look, what's that? Like it's just right there. Like
Well, this is what me and Rob have figured out, right? When you're herping, and I think the key to the success with the Owen Pelly python was the fact that we stayed in the same spot for what 3 or 4 nights, rather than moving all over the place. Because the first time we went to Australia, we were every every day and night we're just moving all around, as opposed to like just going back to that same spot. I don't know.
yeah,
I did
it's,
call it before the trip.
what?
I called it before the trip, and nobody believed me. That's what Justin just said. I did call it in the trip, but
That's
so do you have rough scales in the book?
yeah, and Owen
Okay.
bellies.
And Owen Pellies. All right.
Yeah, we added a chapter on Owen bellies. The most recent phylogenetic work shows that you have kind of a Morelia clade, and that Owen pellies are in the Morelia clade, as are rough scale pythons. They basically are just the first 2 branches off of that lineage. So you've got the lineage, the Morelia line, that'll give rise to the green python complex, the carpet python complex. But the very first offshoot of that line, the first group that splits off, is Owen pellies. And then about 10 minutes after that happens, Carinata splits off, which means that Carinata and Owen pellensis are they split off before the split between carpets and chondros, so they are equidistant. They're in between those 2 groupings. They split off before that. So
Interesting.
Gotcha. Okay.
Behaviorally, they seem to have more affinities with carpet python, the carpet python side, just kind of phenotypically and lifestyle wise. But
Right.
that's why a rough scale python seems like it's halfway between being a carpet and a chondro, because it is halfway between. It's split off before they split from each other.
Okay.
Looking at those sorts of animals are interesting, because if you wanted to get an idea of what the last common ancestor of those 2 of the chondros and carpets look like, it's probably not that far off.
Right.
Right.
And what do you see in the roughies? Oh, a double neck stripe. Go figure, right? Because the last common ancestor.
Very cool.
What about as far as one of the things that Justin talked to me about was that you guys included a lot of wild pictures of carpet pythons, which I think is just the greatest thing
only
ever.
wild carpet pythons. That's the thing. Like the hardest
Excellent.
part was you have 10 species chapters covering all the carpet python species, subspecies, Owen pellensis, and Carinata. So you have 10 of those natural history chapters. And there are no captive snakes. No, wait, I lied. There's one captive snake total in the entire thing. There is a rough scale python showing its threat display with a mouth agape, which you're never going to get a wild one to do that. Like, so that's the only captive snake. Every picture in all these chapters, they are all wild snakes in the wild doing wild snake stuff.
Excellent.
There are captive snakes, the captive animals. So you're not going to see a bright, flashy jungle carpet in that section. You're going to see, wild ones. And you're going to see northern coastal carpets in that section because they're the same thing. So that's, but they're all wild. The captive snakes are confined to the chapters that deal with captivity. So the morph chapter, it's all captive snakes. There's 149 pictures in the morph chapter, 149, and they're all captives. Obviously, in the husbandry and reproduction chapters, the introduction, and those sorts of chapters, there are captive snakes. It's mostly captive snakes. In the evolutionary history chapter, it's predominantly wild snakes, and in the species account chapters, it's only wild snakes.
Sweet.
What wild snakes are doing. So that made it a lot harder, though, because well, I mean, we could make another awesome book about diamond pythons with the pictures we didn't use, because there's so many good diamond python pictures in the wild, and same with like southern coastals, real McDowell. There's a lot, because it's just a highly dense human population and they're in people's yards. So you get a lot of pictures of wild southern form coastal carpets. You get 20 coastal carpets for every one Darwin carpet, because outside of the city of Darwin itself, you have super low, very, very low population densities. There are snakes, and the snakes themselves seem to occur at slightly lower density. There's not as many snakes per hectare as you would expect in like diamond pythons or coastal carpet pythons. So they're a little thinner on the ground, and there's no people, so you don't get a ton of images of wild ones, especially from far-flung places. So there's like an animal behind you, Lucas. I see like a tail.
Yeah, that's my dog.
Well, it's weird because it's like a disembodied tail with no body. I don't even know what kind of animal it is.
He's kind of floppy.
Oh, there we go. All right.
He's not a reptile, but I do love him very much.
That makes sense.
There you go.
So yeah, you don't get get pictures of wild New Guinea carpets. That's a challenge.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
For sure.
Well, we end up having to rework the chapters and everything. We end up with a super abundance of pictures, because when you accept that Cape York and New Guinea are the same snake, then you got a lot. You don't get a lot of wild Cape York carpet pictures, and you don't get a lot of wild New Guinea carpet pictures, but between them you have a decent number. Lucky I found met up with a guy. He's a field does field work in PNG on bats.
Oh wow!
But he takes pictures of everything. He had a ton of like wild carpet pythons around Port Moresby.
That is awesome.
Around there, he wasn't looking for them, but just being there during the field season doing his work, you would stumble onto them on a fairly regular basis. I got quite a few localities from there. Turns out the Indonesian ones are the hardest ones to get a picture of in the wild. The ones we have in the house, like find one of those in the wild is the hardest picture to find.
We were talking to Mark O'Shea about that, and he was showing us pictures of him with just handfuls of carpet pythons from Papua New Guinea. He's just like holding handfuls of them. Just like, wow, okay.
Well, around Port Moresby, you can have a decent population of them and everything, but there's a lot of these other places where they might be, there's just nobody home. I mean,
yeah. I do you think that it's possible that I mean, I know it's been talked about in the book. It was talked about in the Barker's book, or actually it was talked about in the first book about how it's probably not accurate what the Barkers put in the book. But do you think it's not out of the realm of possibility that there could be carpet pythons on the other side of the mountain range in Papua New Guinea?
I don't believe.
I mean, no.
I think
why would they be different than, say, scrubs or green trees? Why would they not?
Okay, the distribution pattern you see in scrub pythons in New Guinea is vastly different than that in carpet pythons.
Okay.
This gets into some other papers, other stuff I'm involved in working on. So I gotta kind of figure out how to work this right. But what you find is that it is not a situation like on New Guinea where, you know, python species A just like gets to New Guinea some kind of way and then somehow manages to hop over mountains and around things and island hop and get all over the place. It is more likely, vastly more likely, that what you have is New Guinea is not a single contiguous landmass. New Guinea is basically the geologic equivalent of like a 5-car pileup on the freeway. New Guinea is the composite.
Okay.
The reason why New Guinea has all these weird different species in these different places is because the topography. New Guinea has a bunch of weird mountain ranges that intersect at weird angles all over the place. It's all chopped up because all the pieces of it were separate islands at one point. The southern lowlands of New Guinea, everything south of the mountains in New Guinea, is actually Australia. That's what that is. That area is called the Papuan Basin, but it is actually the leading northernmost edge of the Australian plate. So it's Australian crust that is like low-lying and got pushed up when it hit. Basically, the Australian plate is moving north, and the Pacific plate is moving west. So it's going this way, and Australia's going like this. And they're hitting at this weird angle. That collision pushed up those mountains, which elevated the lowlands of Australia, which were underwater, above water. There's a reason why you see Australian species in the southern part of New Guinea, because the southern part of New Guinea is Australia.
I have a question there. Did that occur when those land masses were not underwater? Was that before sea levels rose?
The lower part would have presumably been underwater, and by the tectonic uplift of that mountain ranges, it brought it up and out.
Got it. Okay,
so that's how you get the southern part of New Guinea and the mountain range. Where do you get the northern shore of New Guinea? The northern shore of New Guinea was apparently a couple of different arcs of islands on the Pacific plate that are moving east to west that slammed into groups of islands that like slammed in and accreted along the coast, building up that narrow northern rainforest corridor on the other side of the mountains. That's two different island chains that basically slammed into the north, pushing that northern bit of crust up. And then lastly, the Bird's Head Peninsula was a separate island on the Australian plate. It's connected to New Guinea now, but as Australia drifted north, Australia's here and this little island is here and they're on the same plate. The whole thing drifts north, and it currently at this particular time in geologic history forms a peninsula on New Guinea, but it had its own genetic identity prior to that, in the sense that these pythons, a lot of these species that are on those different areas were already there. They dispersed over water, evolved in isolation on these different island groups. Then those islands they were riding around on crashed back into each other, pushing up mountain ranges, and they have maintained separate identities, which is how you get multiple scrub python species, multiple chondro species, and all this stuff in one island, because they became under their own species status in isolation, and the islands they were on came back together.
Interesting.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you look at the Huon Peninsula in the northern coast of above the Bird's Tail Peninsula, there's the Huon Peninsula that kind of juts out, points towards the Bismarck Archipelago. That was an island in the Bismarck Archipelago. The Bismarck Archipelago is on the Pacific Plate. It's moving west. It's getting closer and closer to New Guinea, and one of the leading islands of it was smashed into it and has pushed up a highland area, and it is now the Huon Peninsula of New Guinea, but previously was its own island. And the fauna, wouldn't you know it, on the Huon Peninsula is kind of weird and distinct, isn't it?
Right.
These are questions like, the Condor paper that came out that showed all the different species, or they said subspecies, but there should be species. We all know that. Even they know that probably. But they didn't really, I was a little disappointed. They didn't go into it at all. Like, how did that happen? They didn't make any attempt at all to explain how that sort of partitioning and these different species came into existence. And so working on the scrub python paper and working on this book, it's like I kind of like digging that stuff up. And there is enough data to draw some conclusions that it's the same sorts of forces. What disperses more easily than an arboreal snake?
Right.
It would be an arboreal snake that can reproduce parthenogenically, probably. Like, it doesn't take a lot necessarily to form a new population. And, if you're like a terrestrial lizard, it's pretty hard to disperse over water, because finding a giant mat of storm-driven vegetation floating around that you can ride to a new, that's pretty unlikely. we know that it's happened. It's been observed happening with green iguanas in the Caribbean, rafting to an island they weren't previously on. So we know this happens. That's probably extraordinarily rare. What is probably a lot more common is if you're, a boreal snake living in a mangrove tree right near the ocean and that storm comes, you don't need an entire raft of vegetation. You just need the one stick you were already hanging on to. That stick is your raft, and you've got a perfect grappling hook of a tail to hold on. You know who doesn't need to drink water for days or even weeks at a time? Snakes. Like, they're very well suited to, if you look at distribution of like cat-eyed snakes, like boiga, they're literally everywhere. Why? Because they're probably dispersed really well over water for that same reason. Why are there, you've got lots of insular populations of corallus, same thing. You've got lots of insular populations of, a lot of our boreal snakes get dispersed farther and wider than terrestrial things. That's why, look at the distribution of short-tailed pythons. Pretty limited, isn't it? Because they're not very seaworthy.
Yeah.
But an boreal python, look at retics and scrub pythons. There are scrub pythons in places that would blow people's minds if they do, like some of where these things have been found, and just have like hundreds of miles out into the ocean on tiny islands in the middle of nowhere. It's like, but they're there because they disperse well. So they're kind of built for that. Carpet python.
Makes a lot of sense.
Not
makes
as much.
a lot of sense.
What?
It makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were able to get a couple pictures of Torres Strait Island carpet pythons. That was a thrill. Like,
Really?
Yes, they're on a couple of these islands and got pictures.
No shit.
Like,
okay.
Torres Strait Island carpet pythons. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of a coup. There's a bunch of there's a bunch of awesome pictures I can't wait for people to see. I don't know. I probably shouldn't spoil it or anything, but there's a few,
Justin somewhere in the world going,
Patience.
You spend years begging for pictures of this, that, and the other thing, and mostly it's just disappointing pictures. You get nothing, or it's a disappointment. But every once in a while, you just get like a holy crap! I can't believe we got that.
Yeah.
The hardest thing to get are predation events where someone literally finds a wild carpet python eating some other wild animal, and they just happen upon that and get you a good image of it. It's like, there's a few of those in there, and I'm like, one in particular of an imbricata that there's a few images in this series, and it's awesome.
You picked the absolute best looking carpet python in the world to be on the cover. I mean, that Somerville picture is just
that's
like,
one of those weird things we were
hell.
just talking about. That's one of those, like, it's a Flinders Ranges carpet. That's like, what the heck is this?
Oh
I
my
think
gosh.
One thing I want people, Justin and I too, I think we want people to understand and to get a sense for is that there are still things that are not known. There is still a sense of mystery. There is still the unknown. There are still things yet to be discovered and interpreted out there, even in developed nations like Australia. We haven't found everything. We don't understand everything. There's still some mystery out there, even today. And that snake falls into that sort of.
It's endless. You learn one thing, you get 4 more questions, right? It's just that's the beauty of it all.
This is why I need to get back there. Damn it! Damn you!
We did this time getting pictures of island forms of carpet pythons. So we have a lot of different weird island,
cool
forms of this, that, and the other. So I was pretty happy about that. Got a couple really good shots of Isle of St. Francis carpets in the wild, kind of in situ.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I was like thrilled, and they're high quality images and that kind of. I'm a nerd. That kind of stuff. That's what floats my boat. Seeing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I got a question, Nick. Did Gary still do is the diamond section of keeping still from Gary getting put in there, and Ben's section is still in there, or is that?
I don't think it changed much. It moved in that now it's instead of a subset of the diamond python chapter for continuity, it's a subset of the reproduction chapter. So its location got moved, but there's not. I can't recall if we changed anything of any consequence. Sometimes you need to alter the language at the beginning and the end to kind of fit it to where you're inserting this section into some other stuff. You got to transition. So, but I don't think we changed it appreciably. It's perfectly valid information. It's not likely to ever change. And until I have so much experience breeding diamond pythons that I can bring something new to the table and know something Gary didn't, I'm going to defer to the guy that knows the most.
100%.
It's still there, and that's important information for people to understand. That, like, because this problem of people still screwing their diamond pythons up by treating them like everything else and stuff, it's still, I guess you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I can put the information out there, and I can't make people read it or do anything with it. But I do feel it's incumbent upon us to do our best to impress upon people these sorts of things.
I mean, the last book is my favorite book of all time. So I imagine this next book is just going to be.
It is a lot more. Like, it's a lot more.
Wow.
It's a lot more. Like, everything is way longer. Like, okay, the morph chapter in the first, because I have all the original files. It's mostly just a gallery of images of, look at this cool thing. If you looked at all the text and you stuck all the text together, it's about 4 pages of text. That's all of the text in the morph section. The new one is 20 pages of text. There are sections about like how morphs actually work. There's a glossary of genetics terms so you understand how all that works. There's like a section on like how you actually prove out a new putative mutation. What do you do? If you think you got something, how do you prove it out? How do you go through that process and prove that out? And in the galleries at the end, there's 3 galleries. The last one is a gallery of unproven new mutations that may or may not it's too early to know they're in the middle of that process that we talked about of figuring it out. And so it's kind of your poison ivory has a couple pictures in there.
Woo.
Bunch of melanistic stuff. But there are a few others, like, I don't know, are they genetic? What is it? It's too early to tell. But it's interesting, I think, to see that there are always things in development.
It's crazy to think, 10 years ago, there was, a handful of morphs. And now it's just a huge section in the book because of all the different combinations and stuff is pretty cool.
There's 129 combos. Just combos.
Yeah.
There's actually 130 because number 130 just hatched like 4 days ago. And I contacted me. He's like, can I get it's like, I need it to shed. It's still wet, basically. It would just come out of the egg. And it's what it is, and it's pretty cool. I go, if you can get the second it sheds, get me a good quality picture, and I'll try, but I can't. At this point, when Russ gets to whatever chapter, it's too late. Like, at that point, that's the end. At the rate he's going through the species chapters first, I suspect that I'll be able to get this picture of this. It's a snow silver pepper, which is kind of a triple, which I believe is the world's first triple recessive.
Very cool.
So it's cool, but it's it's got to at least have shed. So I'm trying to squeeze that in. I do get like as soon as I said it's basically I'm done, then I get all these people asking me like, oh, can I get this in there? So,
I think Darren was just talking about that on the Aussie podcast the other day.
Who is Darren?
Darren was mentioning, I think at that point when he recorded it must have not been hatched out, but he was talking about that he hoped that he hit it. So
Darren's got a number of like pictures. Like he was pretty good about like getting me pictures of stuff. He has a bunch of stuff in there. You've got a bunch of stuff in there actually, Eric.
Nice.
I want to say you
blows my mind. That blows my mind.
You have 7 or 8.
Carpet Python book.
You're like in the top 5, I think. There's a lot of people with 1 picture, 2 pictures at most, and there's, and then there's Paul. Of course, Paul has, I think, 47 or something ridiculous.
It's almost as cool as jamming with Eddie Van Halen. Almost,
go, right?
Almost.
What, Lucas?
I said, you end up using my rat?
I think I did.
Yes.
I think I did. Actually, I haven't laid that section out yet. It's in the folder to use it.
There we go.
I've been waiting on a couple of pictures, like trying to get pictures of a couple things, but some things are inherently difficult to get pictures of. Like, I'd love to get a picture of a snake with a bad respiratory infection, but no one wants to give you that picture because they got it. They don't want that photo. They don't want that photo credit.
I work at a major
There's not a bunch of them around. There's just no one wants to give me the picture. So I'm probably not. I got an awesome snake mite picture though from a friend. It's like
I got you on the RI. I can do that for you.
What?
I said I got you on the RI. I can do that for you. I work at the Vivarium.
Is it a carpet python?
Blood python, will that work? There's a blood
Carpet
retreat.
now, it's got to be like a
Damn it. All right, well, I'll keep my eye out. Again, if you have
yeah, these sorts of like, I've got pictures of like malignant intestinal tumors surgically removed and stuff. And
Ooh.
well, I had a snake that got the dreaded intestinal tumor that carpet pythons are, really adept at growing. It was still alive, but I gave it a friend who's a vet tech and works at a vet's office. And I said, look, it's not going to make it, but it's alive for convenience, but euthanize it and get me pictures of what this is and pathology. So I have pictures of, they're pretty small images, but pictures of this, like, of this tumor and the official diagnosis of all that. Cause I think people need to know that. Yeah. A lot of people in the hobby would be quite surprised to find out that snakes get all the same problems we get. They have kidney failure, liver failure, pneumonia, cancer, all the same stuff, that we get, they can get. It's important to know that. With things like tumors, you're really not likely to be able to do much about it, but at least if you know, you know, you can act accordingly. But yeah, so
Alex has a question. He says, when can we buy the new book?
Oh, hell, I don't know. Like, okay. I will not be pigeonholed into a date specific. It's not. Yeah. I'm sure between Justin and I that within the next 10 days, the writing will be 100% complete. The photo layout because how we do this is you write a bunch of Word documents for each chapter. You write all the text, and then it goes back and forth between Justin and I about a dozen times, adding to it, changing it, crossing the other guy's stuff out, rewriting it. And it goes back and forth, and you argue. We don't really argue, but I mean, Justin and I don't argue, but we debate and go back and forth until everybody's happy or nobody's happy or whatever, until you can go no further. And then the next step is you go through and you select the images that you are going to use, and we embed in the text like little color coded like code numbers for where to put images. So when we give that to Russ, who does all the layout, he's got the text, and it's like in brackets, it'll be like 6A-17. And then he goes through a cheat sheet that has like what the caption is, what the photo credit is, and then there's another file that has the actual images whose file names are that code. And so it just is a roadmap for here's the caption, here's the picture, and here's where you put it. Nice. And he assembles it all. Nice. So that process, I can't control how fast that happens. Russ is pretty experienced at doing this. So a couple of the chapters are already back. We already have a couple of them already back in their PDF sort of form. They're not done in the sense that we have to go over it about 10,000 times to proofread it and make sure everything's approved kind of artistically how it looks, and make sure everything's spelled right. It's amazing. You can go over it 10 times and you'll keep finding tiny little grammatical errors and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
something like that size? Hell yeah, man.
I noticed in the I don't want to say jungle carpet chapter, but the chapter formerly known as the jungle carpet chapter. It's now more than just that. But there's like a photo credit that there's like an extra E on the end of the person's name that shouldn't be there. It's stuff like that you're trying to go over it a million times.
Right.
Right. So those are in there revised, the final touches, and I expect, there'll be more added very soon. We've already given him 80% of the book. The only chapters he does not have are the husbandry chapter, evolutionary history, and the intro chapter, which is fairly short. Right. So of a 550-page book, he's probably got 475 pages of it. Ultimately, so plenty to get through. The evolutionary history chapter was always going to be the last one because it's by far the hardest. It is like, I'm going to have to work on that tomorrow and Sunday, and it's going to take me the first hour of writing on that chapter is me just like opening up all these papers and kind of rereading a million things and kind of getting all that data in my brain at one time so they can construct a coherent narrative, because it's just, it's difficult stuff. So it was always going to be the last thing. So finishing the last little bit of that, but it's almost there. I expect I'll finish my last major contribution. I've got Justin's last major contribution. I'll send him. I'll go through what he wrote. I'll add what I'm going to add. I'll send it back to him so he kind of signs off on what I added, and he'll make a few little tiny changes. And by the last time it gets back to me, we're pretty much there, I would suspect. at this point. But it's literally like the 13th iteration of the chapter over a couple year period. But
I know when it comes out, I'm gonna have to make sure I buy 3 copies of it, because when it goes out of print
yesterday, I was like,
6
that's
years
what I'm
from
looking
now,
for.
I'll be able to sell it on Amazon for $700.
I don't know how many copies he's, historically, like Bob would print up about 5,000 copies of each book.
Right.
And that's supposed to last you a period of years. This book is going to be bigger. It will, regardless of what the page count turns out, it's going to be far and away the biggest book in that series of all time. I can't fathom that it's less than 500 pages. So it's going to be noticeably larger than even Vin's second edition, which is about 450. It's going to be probably at least 100 pages longer than that. The print costs have probably gone up. The number of books you ship a case of books, it's the same size box and you're shipping it by weight, but you're going to get less books because it's so big.
Right.
So I don't know how that's going to affect costs, and so I don't know what a price point is. That's not up to me anyway. That's Bob's area of expertise. He's got a lot of experience. He knows what he's doing, so I leave those things to him. But yeah, no, it's they've been pretty good to write books for. I can say, like, it doesn't they don't micromanage anything. They just let us do our thing, and they don't.
That's awesome.
Complete autonomy. It's like really don't. Been almost no disputes of anything. Really pretty agreeable.
Right.
So, and
that's cool.
I don't know. Hopefully, we've done a good job. That'll be up to other people to decide.
So you're the carpet python guy, right? I mean, you're writing a book about it. You wrote one 10 years ago. As soon as you stopped writing that book, you probably thought, oh, I should have put this in there. I learned this, da 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 da. And now here you are 10 years later. How do you stay so enthusiastic through that process? I mean, I guess it's the same for NPR, but you're going so deep diving into a topic. Like,
yeah, is
there any points where you're like, I need a break from carpet pythons?
Yeah, are you ever just banging your head against the wall?
That sort of herpetological burnout, that's real. We all go through those periods. Like if you've paid attention to my social media presence the last few months, I've hardly been around. Like I have and I've kind of not being around and not answering silly questions, and it's kind of like you kind of need a break sometimes. Like burnout is a real thing, and it happens. It's happened to all of us. I'm quite confident. I know it's 100%. Happened to me. It comes and it goes, and you get back on the horse. But it's with the carpets. I don't know. That was the first thing I fell in love with in the hobby, and fortunately for me, it's such a large, dynamic, variable group that there's a lot there. If I can't imagine, like, I was just like, if it was African rock pythons, and it's like, well, you dig up everything there is to know within a few years. I mean, there's not as much to go on. Carpets, just a lot there.
Yeah.
A lot of rabbit holes to go down. And I think we've gone down all of them. Like, I could see someone reading this book and having criticisms of it, but the criticism will never be that they weren't thorough. They will not say that. They might disagree with everything. They might, think I'm a jackass. That's a popular opinion too. I mean, that's probably has some merit. But I mean, you're not going to look at this book and say, well, they didn't do their homework, or they didn't. It's like you might argue we did too much homework. It is. But I think realistically, almost no one is going to get this book and read it from page 1 and end on page 570. They're not going to do that. They skim through it. They go to the sections that are important to them at a particular time and read that or not read that. There are probably 3,000 people that have the first edition of that book that never read any of the evolutionary history chapter at all because it's nerdy, dry stuff. But there's probably those people out there, and this will be no different. It's like it's there if you want to read that. You don't have to. My own.
I'm sure there's certain people in the hobby that wouldn't be drawn to that initially, right? But I think what I've experienced, and I don't know, maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, that for the most part, carpet python people, Moralia people, they seem to dive more into that nerdy stuff. And Nick, you made a prediction back in 2011 that at one point I would be like, who cares about morphs and all this stuff? And I was like, never. And now here I am.
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
pure localities of stuff, and you know, but I
To
think
the ability
I think
that we
what you,
can anyway. That's
yeah,
if I had to choose between morphs and like pure locality forms, then and I could only work with one, it would not take me. It would just be a millisecond to make that decision. I don't have to choose that. I can keep all this stuff because it's my job, so I kind of have to at this point, really. But you know, I will say that like, well, I hatched out like super hypo tiger coastals. That's pretty cool. That's some pretty snakes. Like they every time I got to go in there and feed them or clean them, like, wow, that is really awesome. And I was kind of stoked
100%.
about that. But I'm more stoked about the other stuff. I think is more important to me in the grand scheme of things.
Well, and I feel like too, I mean, at least for me personally, and I know Eric, we relate on this. Like the first book, when I got that, as kind of all this stuff was new to me, I probably flipped to the morph chapter first, and maybe was the guy that skipped the evolutionary history chapter. Come around,
right?
You're that guy. You're that guy.
I might have been that guy at first, but this time I'm going straight to evolutionary history. I'm going straight to Owen Valley. I'm going to look at the morphs. I don't care, but it's like,
Yeah.
I managed to dig up a few. Like I just think the art aspect of it is cool, so I'm putting them in there in the evolutionary history chapter because some of these things were described before photography was even a thing. So you get like these crazy like lithographs of, you know, artistic paint drawings and lithographs of these animals and stuff that are always anatomically kind of questionable. They're not really. I think that's awesome. They're always in weird positions, and I've got you know, some 170-year-old like lithographs of like, well, one of them's Python Peroni, which
it'd have been a fun job back in the day. The guy that got to decide what species looked like.
There are a handful of these. Well, the problem in like when you get back to the early 19th century, even the mid 19th century, is the speed of communication was really slow. So you had and it was kind of a fashionable thing to be a naturalist.
Yeah.
You know, so you had a lot of these mostly well-to-do British guys travel around to remote parts of the world, grabbing wild animals and pickling them and sending them back to museums in Britain to be classified. The problem was that there's a bunch of those guys, and none of them knew that the other guys were there also. So you have multiple people describing the same thing differently because they had no idea that they were operating around the same period of time. They didn't know. I mean, it takes a while. There's not cell phones. These guys didn't know there's other people in the area doing these same things. So later people, academics, museum people and whatnot, synonymized a lot of things. So there is a lot of, if you're going to think around with taxonomy, one of the core principles of that is the rule of priority, which basically just states that if something is a biologically significant thing, i.e. it is a species, you have to use the oldest name that's on the legitimate, honest name that's on the books. That has priority over anything subsequent. So anybody that describes something that's later figured out to be the same thing, the older name is the one that you're stuck with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the older name is terrible. But this happens all the time. And people a lot of times have short-term memories or they conveniently forget about old names because they want to make a new name. As is what's happened with the Oenpelli python getting their own genes. Yeah, it's not valid though. You can't just do that. That paper names Newarin. Great. I think that's an awesome sounding genus name. I love it, except for there was already a monophyletic or monotypic genus erected in 1985 for Oenpellensis called Nyctophilopython, which is a dreadful name.
Yeah.
It's dreadful. Nyctophilopython. True story. It's in Wells and Wellington, 1985. And the paper that Newarin is named in, they knew that was in there. They just conveniently forgot that because they thought no one would care. They literally cite Wells and Wellington 1985 in a paper for another reason and then conveniently forget that same paper erects a genus for Oenpelli pythons because they wanted to make their own name. Yeah. There's actually a whole paper, another group of academics basically calling bullshit on that. So you can't do that. This has priority. Literally, there's a paper rebutting that. And it's that one's really cut and dry.
Oh, science drama.
As much as I want to use Newarin because it's a way better name, you got to play by the rules. Like I'm not
Nyctophilopython.
Nyctophilopython. Yeah, it's terrible.
Nycto.
Yes, Nyctophilopython.
Philo like philo dough.
there are. Oh, wait till you get a load of some of the scrub python ones. It's just ridiculous. Some of the old scrub python names that people like named, and they all got synonymized. And but
well,
some
every
of them
time we
probably,
get Scott on here, he keeps saying King Horny, and I can't stop laughing because I'm a child.
Right.
it is funny. It's some of the scrub python names from the past are just awful. Dusoborensis is one. There's just a bunch of bad ones. There's not as many old carpet python names on the books. There are 4 or 5, and we list. There's a taxonomic history section in the evolutionary history chapter that kind of goes through some of these other things like the python coroni, which is a diamond python. You look at the monograph from the original work, and there's a painting of it, and it's obviously a diamond python, and was properly synonymized as being a diamond python. So there are a few other ones in there, not a ton.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself? I know I'm not. I don't know if you have an answer to this or not, but do you see yourself revising the complete children's Python book?
I don't know. I mean, if it sells all the copies and Bob wants to give it another go, then I'm sure we would.
Okay.
There would be additional data that could be added to that.
Right.
That book was a little shorter than it would have otherwise been. Originally, that book was supposed to be like a $30 paperback only, like 180-page book, a small book at a lower price point. And then so we started writing it with that in mind. So the evolutionary history chapter of that book is a lot more condensed because we're trying to make it a smaller book that fit into a certain number of pages and whatnot. And
right.
We're sending this up to Bob. He says, Bob decided he wanted to put it in the complete series. So then it was like, well, now we got to make it longer. So some of it's probably would have been 20 or 30 pages longer if we just started out with that in mind.
Gotcha.
There is, a few more. There's a bit more molecular evidence with Antaresia. There are some questions that could be answered now. There's questions we could answer now. So there would be things you could expand for sure.
Okay.
So maybe never say never.
Right.
I've got a lot of other writing projects, frankly, like on the table without going into any excruciating detail. Look at Lucas nodding his head. But this is
I said nothing.
I don't know.
That's cool.
Justin and I have become the old guys who write books, I think. We
You're
have
like the two Muppets,
to be, man.
two old Muppets that are up in the balcony or whatever.
I've literally got 3 more book projects. I'm going to start all of them after this carpet book is done. But they're all different subjects, and they are all with different groups of other co-authors. So my own, what I need to write as Nick is not, I need to write half a book. I got to write a third or a quarter of a book, this kind of thing. And they'll be at various stages, but so literally it'd be no rest at all. As soon as this is, after about 7 to 10 days from now, I will no longer need to generate an original thought about carpet pythons. I'll be done thinking.
Knowing you though, you will.
No, the text is done. I won't have to read any more papers. I won't have to do anything hard. my brain won't be sweaty. I'll just be like picking pictures and making sure stuff's spelled right. And it becomes, that stuff is pretty easy to do. I can do that with music playing like in the background. I don't have to focus quite so intently. Once it's the point where I don't need to use my actual brain other than to find spelling errors, I can do other things. And that's what I'm going to dive into. I have a meeting Justin and I have a meeting on the 29th, the team meeting about the very next thing on the 29th. So we will be well into writing another book before this book even anybody sees it.
You get 4 days for Christmas and then it's back to work, damn it.
Yes.
It's actually better that way. We did the Antaresia book. We never stopped. Justin and I were in a real good rhythm. We got our dynamic back and forth between he and I, and it was flowing really well. And what we noticed was when all these Aussies were sending us pictures of wild carpet pythons, they'd oftentimes throw in, oh, here's this cool stimmy I found too, just as for your own interest. And so we had amassed like a fair amount of like cool Antaresia pictures accidentally. And right. I asked those people at the time, hey, if we ever do an ant book, would we use these? So we just basically never stopped. Like we literally just kept going the whole time. And when you're already in that rhythm, it just went a lot. So the ant book was way faster because we didn't have to get our groove back.
Mhm.
I will say that this time we had to get our groove back, especially me. Like, boy, it'd been a minute, you know. It took a minute to get back into that sort of mindset and doing that. But I don't want to. So the plan is to just plow through and not actually ever stop for the next several years.
There you go.
Oh, it's
How will
gonna
I
be
ever
good.
have you on
I think we're gonna be pretty,
Go
I
ahead.
think that I have the luxury of knowing what these 3 books are covering, and I think you guys you'll be pretty stoked, Eric. I think you'll be I think you'll be I
Yeah.
think you'll be pleased with what all we're doing. But I don't know when the time to start talking about that stuff is. Sometimes there are reasons to not talk about things.
Yeah,
You know,
I get it.
well, when you're writing a book about whatever a species group or whatever, or a species, there's always a couple other guys that think they should be the one writing that book, or have been threatening to write said book for years and never did anything. And it's like, I don't really want to light a fire under anybody else's ass to do a thing that I'm doing. So it's sometimes better to, like, you know, not talk about such things until you're pretty far down the track. But suffice to say, there will be 3 other books that will see the light of day, and they'll probably be similarly over the top, I guess, in terms of like content wise. But once you go this far, I don't think you can ever like retreat from that and make a simpler thing. It would just seem like a letdown. So like whatever the bar is set, like the highest the bar ever was, that's where you got to be, or beyond it. You can't go. I couldn't make a second carpet python book that was on par with the first. It has to be better than the first. You have to. It's got to exceed that.
See, Nick, I took your idea you took it to books. I took it to podcasts. I took your same ideas and took it to podcasts. It's like, you got to be bigger, better.
Because I'm looking at a camera. So is that a podcast? Or?
It's a simulcast.
Yeah.
It will be a podcast.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was going to be video. And I'm like, I didn't know that when I signed up. Like, I don't want to be on camera. I'm like,
why? You gotta
like
face for the movies, Nick Mutton.
It's weird sitting there looking at my own self on my monitor while I'm talking in real time.
See, I just look at Riley's beard the whole time. It's a cheat code.
I know, right? He was stroking it a minute ago, doing one of these, like some sort of a super villain.
He's been awfully quiet lately. I think he is a super villain.
Somebody said he was somebody said he was pretty in the chat, and I said, no, he's not pretty. He's a sophisticated metal Viking. That's what he is.
Right. That's right.
He's like, I will get you.
Yes.
I just sit and plot destruction all day.
Somebody's got to.
Excellent.
Well, we're almost at the end of the 2 hours. I don't know, Nick, you know, I assume that this will be on your web. I mean, it's going to be blasted all over the place, and I'm sure that, you know, you'll be on NPR and every other podcast there is talking about it. But, you know, I guess just stay tuned for details. Watch your website. Go buy some carpets while you're over there, or.
Yeah, I guess. My website was having some problems, and I've got it back up and running, but I've got a few kinks to smooth out still as of today. But I'm not very tech savvy, as we've already established. So it is a slog and a strain for me to, you know, be involved with any aspect of that sort of stuff. So, but yeah. That's the problem. See, everybody can see what I look like, and I'm just looking at myself on the screen thinking, like, would you buy a used snake from that guy?
A used snake.
A used snake, a gently used snake from this guy?
Oh, man. Well, if anybody will buy a snake from Owen, I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, you're all right.
Oh man.
Squatching tire. Yes.
There it is.
There he is. Yo,
Nick,
Lucas, you don't know how much you blew his brain last night when that popped up. He's like, we're having this conversation, and he's like, wait a minute. What is that above me?
I'm sorry, I had to pee.
It was so good.
He's never seen that. Oh, it
He
was
could not
great.
proceed. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, stop the
Well,
press.
see, I watched the rest of the show today from the point that I had to bow out, and his brain got broke a few times, especially when his fiance came in.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
It was
I think
real
she
good.
wanted to say more, but I don't know if he was
like,
like pushing her away or what he was doing, you know?
So good. Nick,
but-
I did see in the chat, and I do want to ask you too. What's the lizard behind your left shoulder in the bigger tank there?
Oh, it's a spiny-tailed iguana.
Spiny tail iguana. Sick.
It's like my first cool reptile from a million years ago, and I was like, I mean, I'm like a million-year-old like octogenarian now, but like there was a point where I was in the early '90s. I was like a, total random dipshit hobbyist, didn't know anything. And the coolest lizard in the world, I got my hands on a spiny-tailed iguana, just a Tenosaurus similis, the common spiny tail, and it was like the coolest lizard ever.
Nice.
It was like a female. I would let it out. It would wander around on its own out of its cage. It would let itself back into the cage when it wanted to warm up. It was awesome. I love that thing.
That's
and then
rad.
you get older, your tastes change. You have a million other reptiles and a million other things, and I just like wanted to have a spiny-tailed iguana again because that was such a cool introduction to the hobby for me so long ago.
Nice.
I was like 20 years old or whatever, and then I get this one. It's a complete fucking lunatic. It's like the opposite of what I had. It's
Well,
like,
yeah. A little while ago, it was up at the
it's
front.
actually U.S. captive bred and born. It's not even an imported one. I got it when it was a tiny hatchling. It was still green. And it's an absolute lunatic. It's going crazy. Like it's jumping out of the cage. Like it's like, calm down, man.
I got to get you some Kimberly rocks there. For
Yeah,
your
there we
collection
go.
right there. Yeah, I have
You're
3 of
open
them.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, 3. Yeah.
I keep threatening to get that kind of stuff. I've got a few friends that breed a lot of that kind of stuff. So
Awesome.
I've got like some enablers.
Yeah.
Uh,
You do it.
They're
They're insane.
Awesome.
You should do it.
Yeah.
You should do it.
Greatest move I ever made, Nick.
And then
oh
you can
my
write
God,
the
they're
book
so
for
cool.
that because there needs
I
to
have
be
a lot of work though.
No, they're not.
No.
No.
Really?
What do you
No.
do?
They're not.
Feeding bugs. Oh man.
Yeah, like 2-3 days a week. You keep shit on timers, you're good to go. Change the water here and there. Done. That's it. That's it.
Nick,
Oh,
hey,
that's so cool.
Waters. No, I'm just kidding.
What?
Nick, when you're sitting there at your desk, you can have this little piece of Australia right beside you, like I do. Mine's are right over here. You just look over; they're all running around like you're in the Northern Territory. It's
I got to figure out what to do with all the stuff that's behind me because I now have like, growing pains. I need to convert my office into another baby room. So
Jesus.
behind me will be a wall of like 250 iris shoeboxes.
Excellent.
So I have a baby room that's not part of my house, and so I will have 3 rooms. So the plan is to have like babies that year's babies because my incubator is just down the hall. I have an incubator room, so first babies through their first year in here. Then after yearlings, move them out to the other baby room. So for yearlings and grow outs and stuff, it's getting a little bit bigger, and then I got an adult room, so they'll just be staggered. Because it's like there's too many snakes out in my baby room now, and there always has been. It's just too many. It's like you get too many snakes, you start running into air quality issues and stuff. So I think to depopulate a little bit and split that same amount of snakes up into 2 rooms, I think it'd be a little easier.
Right.
Plus, I'm downstairs, so it's being basically partly underground, with a super thermostable environment for babies. So that's the plan. So I got to build it. Just a ton. I have the tubs. I ordered them. They're like, I have this wall of tubs. It's like this massive 300 and something. I ordered like 320 of them or something. So I have a few extras, but to do it. But,
Oh my God.
so I got to figure out what to do with these guys.
You need a CNC machine.
Yeah, really. That's just a rogues gallery. There's a spiny-tailed iguana. There's 2 female crested geckos. They don't even have a male. There's an undetermined number of mourning geckos in another one. There's a reduced pattern diamond python, and it's breedable practically. And then I've got a rough scale python that has an interesting life history that I can't sell, so he's just a pet. But
Oh, that one. Nice.
Yeah.
I tell you about that. I told
remember you telling us
You
about
told me about that.
the one that had
Yeah.
organs on the outside of his body when it hatched, and it was like
And all is good. All is well.
Yeah, you never. I would have given it like less than 1% chance. It's fine. It's like he's rat fuzzies now. He's doing great.
Yeah.
I could never sell it, but it's like I guess he's gonna live a pampered life in a planted vivarium. But
I'm sure. There you go. Cool.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. What a way to close out 2021. Appreciate you coming
Thanks
on.
for having me.
And 100%. And
Always
I guess we will be waiting at the edge of our seats for this new book to.
Don't sit it too far at the edge of your seat. You might be there a minute. Like,
well,
well, there's some intangibles and some things we can't really control. Like, we get the book done, and at that point, you're just at the mercy of the printer. Like, you're waiting in line because there are other people in front of you they need to print. So I don't know how long that line is, the queue is to get printed. And since they're printed overseas, they have to get shipped to the U.S.
Oh, Lord.
Shipping is like problematic these days and stuff. So there's a lot of delays in shipping, and that I don't know if that will be sorted out completely by that time, but it's kind of hard to predict. So there could be. That's why I keep telling people can't take a pre-order on something. I don't know how much copies are going to cost. I don't have like a really reasonable estimate as to when it'll be out. I can say that I will be done putting actual real thoughts into it in a few days. After that, it becomes just busy work and clean up and fine tuning of things. But and then it's largely out of our hands.
Sometime in 2022.
Oh, 100% in 2022.
Okay, there we go. All right.
Secretly, I've been kind of don't quote me on this, but I'm kind of hoping for late spring.
Okay.
You said it. No, I'm kidding.
It takes a period of time for them to print them and then ship them and then distribute them. It's like there's a the supply
it's a process
aspects that we have very little control of, and there's a lot of issues with that of late. So
yeah, for sure. All right, can I do one? One more question, Eric.
Go for it. Yeah.
All right, Nick. I can't have you and Eric in one virtual room without a Star Wars question. So, are we more excited about the Kenobi show or the Boba Fett spinoff show?
I'll let Nick go first.
Riley, I love you too, but you can just hang out.
I am most excited about the Cassian Andor show.
Okay.
Because that will likely be a darker, grittier, more hardcore story.
No, I hope so.
They hired Tony Gilroy, who directed and reshot the last third, the Battle of Scarif and Rogue One, and made it like super duper hardcore.
He's brutal as hell.
That guy's the showrunner and wrote and produces that series, and it's so dark that Rogue One started out with a murder. Like, it literally started out where your hero literally kills his own guy to shut him up. Like that's what I want. I'm expecting that show to be hardcore and more like adult oriented and war oriented. So that's actually the one I most.
Yeah, I love it. No, good answer. How about you, Eric?
I think I would agree. I think I would agree with that one. Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about it, but I'm with you guys. I think I'll go that Kenobi and then Boba's last. Sorry, Boba.
Rogue One was the best Star Wars movie in my opinion, because when I was a kid in like 1979 or whatever it was when I went and saw that, yeah, right.
But
it was like it like you saw the other part of the story. I guess it gave you like the prequel history of it, and I don't know. It was the best.
I feel like it was the best balance of originality and intent, but also like just enough fan service for everyone to feel satisfied.
Right.
I thought Rogue One is my all-time favorite Star Wars movie, even more than Empire.
Agreed.
I agree. Fight me.
It's money.
It must be our generation, Nick.
What?
It must be our generation.
I agree.
It's like a movie for grown-ups. It's hardcore. It's brutal. It shows that, like, because you watch the other Star Wars movies and you almost get the impression that you can have a galaxy-wide war where nobody dies. it's like with no stakes, really. It's like this is like, whoa, apparently it ain't easy stealing Death Star plans. That cost a lot. And it makes the original Star Wars from 1977 better because it shows you, it makes the stakes higher because it shows you what came.
Yes.
There's like one line, right, in the original.
Yeah,
many
It adds
rebels
extra
died
weight to it.
using these plans. It's like,
Yeah, no, I love it. So any continuation of those. There's a line where Cassian in Rogue One tells Jin, he says, "We've all done terrible things
right.
for the rebellion." I want to see those terrible things. That's what I want to see. I want to see you
It
do
adds
some
more
terrible things.
nuance to it all.
Some morally gray stuff. Like, that's what I want to see. So
Right.
that's what I'm looking forward to.
Hell yeah, man. Good answer. Riley, come on back. Come on back to us.
Stropherus tinicata. Sorry, what?
Amazing gecko. Amazing gecko.
Reading
I
about
love it.
geckos.
I'm not gonna lie. I've watched all the Star Wars. I grew up with all of it. I also grew up with ADHD, and I cannot for the life of me like organize any of those movies in any sort of order. Let alone keep the names in track of what happened with what name. Like, you guys don't understand. A name to me is a category. Is the same as the movie actions is a category. It's the same as what fucking happened. So you tell me like, oh yeah, this movie, like, yeah, I probably saw it. What happened to it? I don't fucking know. You tell me. And I'll say, yeah, I've seen it. Which one was it? I don't know. You tell me. Yeah, that one. Like, that's where I'm at. I'm like, I've seen it. I promise you. But like, I can't remember shit.
Right.
I'm such a nerd. I read all the books and everything. I read every new canon book that comes out.
I almost got Nick in trouble once because I sent him a Star Wars themed like workout cup thing as like a thank you, and
Right.
like I guess I didn't make it clear that it was from me, and his girlfriend opened it and was like, "Who's sending you gifts?"
Caused some trouble.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Oh,
And
that's great.
I'd say Lucas. I'm like, it's like
Lucas from State Farm, what's he wearing?
Khakis.
Yeah. Anyway, very good, very good.
All right. I guess
All
we
right.
are out. Yeah. Again, thanks, Nick. Thanks
Anything
everybody
else
for
you want?
listening.
Good job, guys.
And we'll be back next year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Shoot. Everybody have a
Something like that.
wonderful, safe holiday season, and can't wait to bring in the new year with some more carpets and coffee.
That's right.
absolutely.
All
All right,
right.
guys. Cool.
All right.
Bye.